there, Alaskans, wherever you are. Welcome to the Must Read Alaska Show. Coming to you from somewhere in Alaska. This is the place where we talk about, you guessed it, Alaska. Where we keep the mainstream media on their toes and where we are standing up for what's right in a world run by leftists. You can find out more by heading over to mustreadalaska.com and also checking out the Must Read Alaska YouTube channel for some really great content. But first, let's get this party started.
Welcome, everybody, to the Must Read Alaska Show. I'm your host, John Quick, coming to you live from somewhere in snowy Alaska. Geez, I just flew back from Nashville last night, drove home in a blizzard, went to bed at midnight, woke up in the morning, another blizzard happened. It just doesn't seem to let up, but I guess that's why they call it Alaska, the 6 months of winter. We have a very special guest today, somebody who's been on the show, I don't know, a handful of times, and I always appreciate him coming on. I think it's always good to chat with folks from all walks of the political spectrum. And this is a guy who has figured out how to give a voice to the folks in the middle, which is a big chunk of people in Alaska. So without further ado, welcome to the Must Read Alaska Show, Scott Kendall.
Thanks for having me, John. Appreciate it.
Well, I'm excited you're on. We were chatting earlier about the Seahawks hat. You are a big Seahawks fan, are you not?
Yes, I was raised in the, some of my earliest memories are from the Kingdom when I'm like 4 years old going to games. So absolutely.
I was there when they flattened the Kingdom. My dad drove us down there, and
cool.
We were like far away, obviously, because we didn't want to get flattened ourselves. But me and my dad and a couple of my buddies who went, we snuck kind of in and around the Kingdom, and we all picked up little chunks of the Kingdom after it got flattened. So
very cool.
I still have a little teeny chunk in my treasure box up in my attic area. So
yeah, I mean, they had to knock it down because it was already falling down, if you remember.
Yeah.
The pieces of the ceiling falling on the stands during Mariners games. It was a kind of a pit.
So one of the things I wanted to chat about is these middle vote folks. I think that, in probably any other of the 40 or 50 states we go to, you got a two-party system, really. Maybe you have some 5% libertarian or 1.5% Green Party or something like that. But essentially, it's two-party system. We have a very unique thing in Alaska, and there's going to be folks listening to the show that don't live in Alaska, where a big majority of our voters are not Democrats, they're not Republicans, they're nonpartisan or undeclared. Talk to me a little bit about that. Kind of break that down. I see you as somebody who's kind of been king of the middle. So for folks that are listening to this and don't even know how do you even vote if you're not a Republican or Democrat? Fill people in on what does that mean to be in the middle?
Right. I mean, Alaska is really unique, although it is a growing trend nationwide, as we know, which is here in Alaska, 63% of us don't affiliate with either major party. We got something like 24% Republicans, 13%-ish Democrats, and the rest are either, an obscure small party or no party at all. And it's an interesting phenomenon because, within that 63%, obviously there is immense diversity. People who are, maybe so far right, they're right beyond the Republican Party, or so far left, they're left beyond the Democratic Party. But I also think sort of an underrated factor here is the three-dimensionality of politics here in Alaska, which is, we don't plot things just left to right. There are interest groups and, people who have a certain charisma or connections because we're such a small state that it doesn't necessarily just plot that simply. I talked to a friend the other day. He lives in Wasilla. He is an incredibly conservative guy, very, very conservative, great guy. He voted in the U.S. Senate race for the Democrat Pat Chesbrough first. She taught his kids in school. It was that simple to him.
Had that personal connection.
Yeah, and so there was a no-brainer, and then he actually felt some angst over whether to rank either Senator Murkowski or Kelly Tshibaka next. So those people exist. And there's also just, when you look at the success of someone like Mary Peltola, which sort of defies political gravity to outsiders, but, she authentically talks about issues that I think Alaskans identify with. I have friends in the lower 48, and they're like, you got someone who's just talking about fish? Who on earth can run for office talking about fish all the time? And you and I would be like, well, you're up from the Kenai Peninsula even more so. Like fish, every Alaskan thinks they're a fisherman, every one of us. So it's very different and in some ways unique to Alaska, but I do think nationwide, I think when you look at the presidential race, if voters are faced with Trump or Biden, I think that there is probably a majority of voters in their heart of hearts who'd prefer an option other than those two. But that is, again, the two-party system at work.
So do you think there's a uniqueness to Congresswoman Mary Peltola because Sarah Palin was in the race, or do you think there's a uniqueness because she's just a unique kind of special person?
I think it's mostly the latter, because I did look at under ranked choice voting, the system generates what's called a cast vote record, and you can actually kind of see what turns out to be sort of an elaborate graph of, what did, who did Nick Begich voters rank next? Who did Sarah Palin voters rank next? And what you see is from those numbers that head to head, she would have beat Sarah Palin, and head to head, she would have beat Nick Begich. That, whatever it is she has an appeal that goes kind of across the spectrum, and not only, obviously dominates with moderates, but I think actually carves into a lot of traditional Republican voters. There's a lot of them who see her, they see her advocacy for the Willow Project on the slope, they see her advocacy on fish, and they say, that resonates with me.
Yeah, and they, I voted for Nick Begich, but what I would say about Congresswoman Mary Peltola is that almost everybody that I've met that knows her says good things about her, and she's got that smile on her face, and that went a long ways in a race that was got a little crazy real fast.
Yeah, I mean, I do think you saw genuine affection between she and Governor Palin. And when you saw that in a ranked choice environment, lo and behold, those were the top two finishers by a significant margin. And I think, people are, despite what we see every day on TV and despite what we may think, I think people are looking for a little bit of civility and normalcy, because we don't, as much as you or I might disagree, or me and someone else might disagree. Like, I've got a neighbor across the street, very different politics than me. We bump into each other at the mailboxes. We do not shout at each other. You know what? We pet each other's dogs. We help each other change a spare tire. It's just not how we act.
So what do you think's been missing for the two-party system to not be able to effectively bring a voice to this very large middle group of voters who haven't maybe found a home on purpose?
I mean, it really, to some degree, I think it's systemic. When you have a closed primary system, whether you let nonpartisan voters in or not, you brand a system as this is the Republican primary, this is the Democratic primary, it's exclusionary. And so, your decision group is, you're trying to say you're the Republican Party and you want to have the strongest Republican candidate in the general election. Well, only 10% of the voters, and they are the furthest to the right, are picking that person. Are they necessarily going to be the most viable in November? Probably not. But then you see minority parties like the Democratic Party not wanting open primaries because they kind of want the Republicans to nominate someone so goofy that they can beat them. I call it kind of the Herschel Walker effect, right? Like, the Republicans, they got Herschel Walker, and now he's talking about werewolves and vampires, and they should have won that seat, but they didn't because that was the candidate they had. Under our system in Alaska, they likely would have had a backup candidate, right? They would have had another Republican in the race, and it could have turned out very, very differently. So the partisans in both parties sort of have this incentive. On one end, they want control. They want a candidate who's true to their values, and the truer to their values, the better. And on the other hand, they may want the other party to nominate an extremist, so they're easier to bump off. So it's these very bizarre competing interests, but they don't necessarily lead to the most effective leaders being elected.
Do you feel like, I'm sure that you've had a chance to chat with, probably more so than most people, this middle group of folks. Do you feel like they are happier today than they were, let's say, 2 years ago, when they didn't have a party that represented, them necessarily?
Yeah, I mean, I will say, granted, the people who will talk to me is a self-selecting group. So with that caveat, I will say people enjoyed There's a couple of things. They enjoyed at the end. At the end of the day, if someone wanted to vote for Mary Peltola in the primary and Lisa Murkowski or Kelly Tshibaka, they could, because that ballot existed, a ballot that had a mix of candidates, and they liked the competition being pushed to November. Even in a couple of our House seats, of course, actually had four Republicans running, but there was competition in November because those four Republicans were all vying for your vote. And even if you're a Democrat, located in downtown Wasilla, your voice mattered, because just like any other variety of people, Republicans can be very different than one another. So people really liked, I think, the feeling that those candidates were fighting for their vote to the very end, as opposed to, typically in a partisan district, the Republican or the Democrat wins, and then they can go to sleep for the general election because it's a done deal. And I think people like free markets. They like competition, and that's what this does.
What do you think this does for other races in the US? I mean, obviously there's, other states are looking to see what Alaska is doing, if it's going to be repealed or not, if it's not going to be repealed, or, if ranked choice voting is here to stay. Do you think this is going to catch on in other states? I mean, it kind of has in some ways in other states already.
Yeah, there are sort of growing movements in, I would call it, 8 to 10 states, and at various levels of infancy. Nevada is very far along. They passed our system once. Under their constitution, they have to pass things twice. I don't get it, but they're running it again next year. And then there's a number of states looking at it, but there's sort of this very, very broad agreement. A lot of people are intrigued by our system, but the broadest agreement I'm seeing is just like, we got to do something about primary elections, that there is something fundamentally wrong with a minority of voters choosing what the majority gets to pick from.
So do you think that this is going to, let's say, a candidate that usually would never have a chance in heck because maybe they're not even a libertarian or a Green Party, maybe they have no party. Do you think that person at the end of the day has a better chance to get their voice heard through this new system, ranked choice voting, than they previously had? Because I think, as I talk to people, just that maybe are not in the political umbrella like people like you and I know, I think that that's just a normal concern for folks, that it's going to get rid of the folks who may have had a voice under a Green Party or a Libertarian Party, that now that's never going to be a possibility anymore. Can you elaborate on if it's gives them a bigger voice or a smaller voice in your opinion?
Yeah, I actually think the opposite is true. And I actually designed the system with that in mind, because under the old system, you got a Democrat versus a Republican, and the game was always, the Republican would like to get a Green candidate in to shave votes off the Democrat. The Democrat would like to get an Alaska Independence Party or Libertarian in to shave points off the Republican, because those votes just go in the trash, right? If that person finishes third, what does it matter how many votes they got? Now, under this system, if that person's in the race, now you're courting those votes. The Libertarians got 6% of the vote. That may be the deciding margin. And so those other candidates really have to grapple with their issues. So I actually think it's very generative of a debate around the issues for these small party candidates. And I actually think, when there's an excellent candidate, I think we're going to see, a couple of them break through and win. We do have more non-partisans now in the legislature than we've ever had. I think it's just sort of a matter of time before, whether it's Green, Libertarian. I mean, I think quite honestly, there's some people serving in the legislature now that I think probably are more of a Green candidate or a Libertarian, but the old two-party system forced them to pick a label that was viable. I know a couple of my Republican friends, particularly those who are very anti-regulation, but also true to their word, kind of want the government out of people's bedrooms and so forth. That leads them to kind of more moderate social policies. I think at heart they're libertarians, right? But they run as Republicans. So I do think this levels the playing field, and candidate quality is going to be the defining factor.
So what's your thoughts on the congressional race? We got Lieutenant Governor Nancy Dahlstrom in, we got Nick Begich, who previously ran, and we have obviously Congresswoman Mary Peltola. I don't know if there's another Democrat or not that's threw their name in the hat yet, but There probably will be. I could see that happening.
Yeah, it's possible all sorts of people get in, but there's three main candidates. I mean, I think Representative Peltola's quality as a candidate, whether you voted for her or not, it's proven. She won twice. She won by a substantial margin. I think people know that she is a strong candidate. That's clear. I think a lot of people, correctly questioned, why would Nick Begich get in again? You finished third again. Why get in the race? And I think, Lieutenant Governor Dahlstrom's entry into the race is clear that sort of the Republican establishment back in DC wanted a different candidate than Nick Begich, and they found it. Now she's been elected statewide, granted, on a ticket with a very popular governor at the time, Governor Dunleavy, so a little bit untested. It will be interesting because I've only met Lieutenant Governor Dahlstrom once, but I will say universally, when I talk to Democrats, Republicans alike, people agree she's a lovely person. She's very personable. So we'll see. I mean, I think that's two very strong candidates. There's interesting dynamics, though. There is, of course, Peltola's got a rural coalition.
Mary Peltola is going to be a fundraising machine. I mean, it's just
Right.
going to be next level, like unlike anybody's ever seen before here in Alaska.
But at the same time, she's got to feel the target on her back because she's one of 5 people serving in the House who won a district that Trump won. One of 5 Democrats, I should say. So I would think that there is a big target on her, notwithstanding Alaska's idiosyncrasies. There's, sort of the age factor. Nancy Dahlstrom's a generation older than Mary Peltola, and we kind of like our people to get into office and stay there for decades, right? So there's going to be a lot of factors that I don't think people have thought about yet. But I will say this, everyone I've talked to has nothing but nice things to say about Nancy Dahlstrom interpersonally. But, it's a big stage. It's a statewide election. I'm sure people are combing her record, and we'll see what we see.
Yeah. Well, I'm a big fan of Nancy, the Lieutenant Governor. She's been on the show several times. She'll probably come on here in the next couple of weeks. And Congresswoman Mary Peltola, you're invited anytime you'd like. So if you're listening in, the invitation always stands. You can come on whenever you want. So 20 minutes has gone by in a flash. Scott, any last minute thoughts here before we head out?
No, I'm going to wish luck to our beloved Seahawks this weekend. But look forward to getting together again. I think there's always something interesting to talk about. So love to come back soon.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate it, Scott. For folks listening in and you want to help keep the lights on here at Must Read Alaska, or you want to be a sponsor of the Must Read Alaska show, just email me at john@mustreadalaska.com or go to mustreadalaska.com. On the right-hand side, there's a little donate button. Every $5, $10, $100 helps keep the lights on here at Must Read Alaska. And until next time, I'm John Quick from somewhere in Alaska. Thanks, Scott.